thank you all so much for coming out on such a hideous night, although let's be fair about it, we're all used to it living in London. Despite the accent, it's never generally as bad as this where I come from. First things first, the hashtag for this evening, I am told, is Frontline Club. Seeing how many people went straight to the Blackberries at that point, that's encouraging. That's very encouraging. Well, tonight, as Patrick said, this is all about debating the utility, the influence of social media, digital media, come the time of the next election, whenever that might be, although we're all fully expecting it to take place on May the 6th. So first, I think I'd just introduce you to the panel that we have here tonight. On my right, first, Krishnan Guru-Murthy, Channel 4 presenter extraordinaire, and as I was just reminding him, the chap who presented me with a prize 20 years ago in the Young Journalist of the Year competition. I was very, very young at that point.
Well, I was 20 years ago.
Maybe a little bit less than that then, possibly. To my immediate right, Alberto Nardelli, the CEO and co-founder of Tweetminster, something of a phenomenon in Westminster at the moment. To my left, we have Paul Staines, probably better known to most of you here as Guido Fawkes, guerrilla hack, blogger extraordinaire, add your own sobriquet, order.com. And then to his left, we have Chris Condron, who is the Press Association, one of the great institutions of the British press, the Press Association's head of digital strategy. To kind of give you a little bit of an idea of where I'm coming from on all this, this will be my first general election as a political correspondent, indeed my first election as a reporter. So perhaps I don't necessarily have the backstory when it comes to the influence of social media that many of you might have. At the same time, I think Krishnan might agree with me here. We in the broadcast media, over the decades since television news really took off, have been at the forefront of pushing on technology. So we find ourselves in the rather curious position of, on occasion, having to play catch-up. So you know where I'm standing. I think the biggest question, and one which you may expect us to come to at the end, all of us on this panel, I think, are in agreement that this will probably be the first closely fought, well, certainly the first British election in which digital media, social media, have an influence. The question is just how much of an influence they will have. And I think let's go to blogger extraordinaire Paul to start this off. I mean, where are we with social media at the moment? Are we in a position where it really is a game changer, or is it as reactive as many believe it has always been?
It remains to be seen. I think we won't know for sure till afterwards. But in the 2005 election, I remember after that went by, everyone had the headline. I saw a headline saying the blog that didn't bark. You know, it didn't really happen. But there were a few stories that came out of the blogs that were easy to do. This time around, you know, Twitter's the sexy thing at the moment. Today, when there's no news flow going, you've got a Twitter story dominating the broadcasters. Where we are is that it remains to be seen, but anything that's got a Twitter story in it is sexy at the moment.
Certainly there's a lot of pick-up on one particular story, which I'm sure you're all expecting us to come to. We'll possibly come to that just a little bit later on. But Chris, the Press Association, the wire service, I mean, one that gets its information straight to those who wish to receive it as instantaneously as possible. I mean, where do you guys go with digital media during this election campaign?
Digital media is at the forefront of what we're doing. We do all the boring stuff that lets everybody else do the interesting stuff, I think. Our motto is fast, fair and accurate. I think throughout an election campaign, accurate's the key to that rather than fast or fair. We've played with Twitter before, and Paul's been part of one of the stories when we've been burned before as well. So there was an instance of somebody at PA, I think it was a Miliband, commiserating, what's the word, help me out. Mourning Jacko, and somebody got stung doing that and was doing something they shouldn't have done. So I think we will be monitoring social media, but we will be very, very fair, and we'll be very, very belt and braces about what we report.
I mean, Alberto, social media is essentially what you do. I mean, first, maybe for those who don't know what it is exactly that Tweetminster do, why not explain? But then go on to also explain how 140 characters can take on such significance in an election campaign which many believe won't be that markedly different to what's gone before.
Yep. So in terms of what Tweetminter does, we help people find and follow politicians, political journalists and candidates using Twitter. So to filter out the noise and help you find what's important, what's happening on Twitter around politics. In terms of the question, in terms of the impact that Twitter might have on the election, I agree with Paul. I don't think we know the actual impact that Twitter or other social media will have on the election. I think one thing that's key, what really will decide an election will be the candidates, the policies, the usual stuff. Things like Twitter, though, help parties and journalists to communicate messages, to interact with voters, to mobilize supporters. And that's where its real power is. That's where it's changing the way things are done. It's changing the way news is shared. It's changing the way people react to stories. It's changing the way people make mistakes using these tools. And I think that's really what's going to have an impact, the different types of dynamics.
Okay, let's go to one of the media professionals sitting on the team here, although let's be fair about it, I think we are all now, aren't we? Old school media professional, mainstream media professional of the three. I mean, how much influence does it have on putting together, the 7 o'clock bulletin for Channel 4 News? I mean, how across what is happening in the Twitter sphere, the blog sphere are you? And what does that tell you about where we might be come May the 6th?
Quite a lot. I mean, I wouldn't say Twitter, determines what our lead story is going to be, but a lot of us on Channel 4 News are now on Twitter, and we're kind of talking all the way through the day. We're having we just refer to it as a conversation with our viewers, and we talk about what is important, what's not, what's making news, what people are interested in, and so it influences us passively, if you like. I mean, we don't let people decide things, but it's another.
Have you ever run a trending topic on Twitter close to the top of your rundown?
Not just because it was a trending topic. Right. No, I mean we wouldn't be influenced in that sense, but it is a way to stay in touch with people and to stay in touch with a part of your audience, and to be aware of what people are talking about. I mean, I think the thing about Twitter is, and all social media is, the key point about them is that they are direct and quick. And so it means you can contact people directly. I can talk to a politician, I can talk to a viewer, I can talk to another, to a blogger about a story. And what that means is it's another forum for people to say controversial things, to make gaffes, and to push a story on. It's not sort of game-changing in that it's this weird thing that is totally out there on its own. It's another means of communication. It's a very direct one.
But is it something that you and your colleagues have been, shall we say, shoved into, rather than that you've something?
No, it's happening.
I know from my own particular newsroom, there are a small collection of political correspondents at Sky. You can maybe work this one out for yourself, but there are at least a couple of them who have proved slightly reticent to take up the Twitter ring.
No, it's happened totally organically at Channel 4 News, and there are no rules at the moment about what we've got to do or what we've not got to do. I mean, some of us have taken it up, some of us haven't bothered, it's really been a thing that's been a sort of slow process of people seeing what the advantages are of Twitter. Either some really simple advantages in terms of promoting your story, sending people to a link, sending people to a blog, getting people talking about something, to finding information, finding an individual. The day Nick Griffin was on Question Time, we had 2 reporters outside the BBC trying to find people who were going in and who weren't going to Jonathan Ross or whatever it was that was also queuing up at the same time. I just sort of tweeted, anyone going to Question Time, and we got a bloke, found, met up with him. Simple things like that convert people in the newsroom really quickly, because they go, well, that's quite useful. It's not the end of the, it's not a Martian landing, but it's quite a useful tool.
Paul, you've been around on the internet for in terms of the lifespan of the British blogosphere, quite a considerable amount of time. I mean, what changes have you noticed, both in the way that kind of individuals like yourself approach news stories because of this unmediated access to the public, but also the mainstream media itself? The dead tree press, if you want to call
I think
that.
people are picking up tips and leads on Twitter quite a lot, and it's a sort of early warning system. It's canary, in the mine, but you don't usually get scoops via Twitter. And I think you're basically you can sample and you can poll what's going on and what people are interested in, and you can use it. I mean,
you've got less than 8,000 followers.
I mean, trivial, yes.
No, but in the grander scheme of things, Stephen Fry, where's he? Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think you go in politics. It's Sarah Brown. And it's Boris. And Sarah Brown's got, I don't know, 1 million, and Boris has got 50,000 or 70,000.
All those that were on Twitter's suggested user list.
Pardon?
All those that were on Twitter's suggested user list tend to have more followers, because everyone that signed up to Twitter automatically gets recommended to follow certain accounts. So the accounts which are on that list have much higher followers than others.
Yeah. I mean, it's the influence of the audience. I mean, my readership is C4 News, you, and the rest of all the media. So it's basically the whole village is listening. There's about 500 of us who are all listening to each other, aren't we? Let's be honest. And we don't want to miss out on anything. Don't want to know what you're up to. And that's that. One thing that I did notice during the Chilcot inquiry, which was very interesting, and there were loads of people twittering, and obviously a lot of journalists feel quite emotional about Iraq, the issue, and all the broadcasters forgot we were impartial and were saying Blair's a bastard, what a fucking line coming in, all that. And I thought, hello, was that on
I was not at the Iraq inquiry, I'd like to point out.
Was that on a BBC phone, Laura? So I think you can make a fool of yourself on Twitter quite quickly.
For those outside of the kind of the blogosphere, but
so this might be heresy, but when you take a group of journalists and you ask them about any phenomenon, whether it's Twitter, Second Life, Facebook, whatever, they tend to talk about it in terms of what it means for journalists. And I think that the interesting thing about Twitter, which is potentially game-changing, though absolutely not yet, is what it means for audiences. Because it enables audiences to connect around issues, and it enables audiences to build networks, and it enables audiences to start to self-organising.
How long is that going to take? I mean, we've had mass Twitter use for what, two and a half years?
No, I don't think we've got anything like mass Twitter use yet.
As mass as it might get?
Possibly. But I think also journalists tend to see these things as content mediums, and I think essentially it's predominantly a communications medium. And broadcasters or journalists like to direct conversations, and this might be about people like us contributing to other people's conversations rather than owning them. And I think that's very, very early days, but I think that's where it's interesting, because we don't know how it's going to pan out.
I think we'll go in a little bit more detail into the kind of the organisational aspect of social media just a little bit later on, but kind of just to focus for a while on the kind of the mainstream media and its kind of almost on occasion uneasy alliance with the blogosphere. Okay, Paul, as an example, I noticed a banner on your site a while back setting your setup as the election centre. It was something along those lines.
Oh, yeah. Under marketing, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a blogger with an audience in front of you furiously twittering, I mean, can you say as a straight face that a blog run by a man with a couple of interns is the place to go when you want information, essentially to decide which way your vote's going to go?
It's obviously a piss take out of Fox News, as you probably realise. I'd say it's different. I mean, Channel 4 News, 7 o'clock, what, got 2 million viewers, something like that?
At any one point in time, about 1 million. But we have
1 million. Yeah. Newsnight, 1 million. The news shows, obviously a different league. Sky News, 100,000, 200,000, something like that. It's an important audience, okay? I have, on a good day, watching my videos, 10,000, 20,000 people. It's a completely different league. However, it is all you lot watching it, hopefully. And my target demographic is media influencers. I'm trying to leverage my position onto the media to get whatever I want to do into a wider audience.
Well, the Londoner's Diary seems to have taken up that cause with aplomb. Well, it just lifts stories from your site, doesn't it?
I'll send them an invoice.
Yeah, no worries.
But every time Nick Robinson has a go at Paul, it's great business for Paul.
He can't help himself, though.
No, exactly. So I mean, it is a sort of a.
But is that the type of thing that we are likely to see in an election campaign where the polls are fluctuating plus or minus 5 at the moment? Where there is the real possibility of a hung parliament. Is that the type of thing that senior politicians will do during an election campaign? You know, be involved in a situation in which a high-profile blogger...
They'll never give me an interview, and they will give you an interview. They won't give me an interview for various reasons.
You're not going to be sitting on Newsnight next to a cabinet minister during the election campaign, are you?
Not after last time I was there.
Fair point. Alberto, you're probably best placed amongst all of us to kind of gauge how this has been going, but you know, the take-up in Twitter and the Houses of Parliament has not been substantial. I mean, it's been you know, over the past couple of months.
There are more MPs tweeting than there are blogging.
True, absolutely. But where is the effect? We have the MPs, you know, twittering away from the chamber of the House of Commons. Where is the noticeable effect?
I think I agree with Chris. Fundamentally, if we understand that Twitter is a communication platform, and as such, it's not a closed environment. So the impact that it has is very much distributed. It has impact in terms of individuals which are discussing a specific topic. It has impact in terms of which news story gets distributed the most and shared the most amongst people. So for example, the other day I noticed the Daily Mail had a story with an outrageous title, yet lots of people talked about it. And interestingly, the next day on Newsnight, the topic of that article was then mentioned. So it trickled up to other media channels. And the same goes with MPs using the tools. It allows them to put forward their perspective. It allows them to give opinions, to counter-argue what mainstream media are saying, and that will have an impact on people which are following them, but it will also have an impact in terms of people which use that information to talk to their friends.
But
it's very fluid.
Huge, yeah, absolutely, and there are huge risks inherent in that, aren't there? I mean, let's talk about the story of the day. David Wright, Labour MP, who still uncertain about this, but I think I know the opinion of one person on the panel as to whether or not he was responsible for the scum-sucking pigs tweet. I mean, in those circumstances, isn't every single member of the Labour Party that has even come close to signing up to a Twitter account, just thinking, best to step away from the keyboard?
I think the actually the right story doesn't have much to do. I think it's irrelevant, the fact that it happened on Twitter. I think the story is someone said something.
That's not true, because if they had said that face to face, we wouldn't have reported it. It's because it's on Twitter that it's become sexy.
I think the fact that it was on Twitter and the lack of understanding. So I watched an interview today on a news channel, and the journalist kept asking questions which were technically wrong and showed a lack of understanding of how Twitter actually worked. Because I think that example, what's happened is very clear. Someone said something they shouldn't have said. They didn't apologise, and they made lots of stuff up to try and cover.
Isn't that lack of appreciation? Yes. Isn't that lack of appreciation of how Twitter operates? You know, something experienced by the vast majority of the British population.
There are stories every single day. If you buy a tabloid, there are stories every day which are about politicians and other people doing or saying things which they shouldn't have done, and it's about how they deal with the fact that they made mistakes. So and trying to cover their tracks, and it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same way in which, when they get unearthed by a blogger or by a tabloid, instead of saying I made a mistake, they try to cover their tracks and oftentimes amplify the noise and make things worse.
But that's the point, isn't it? I mean, yes, it's an old politics story. You know, an MP has said something or not said something that he then regrets or doesn't regret because he didn't say it, and then tries to deal with it. The point is that Twitter is a new platform and a new medium in which this is going to happen. So, you know, it's another place you're going to get gaps. It's another place you're going to get. Absolutely. You know, you're going to get things said. The key difference with Twitter is that people do get caught up in conversations and say things in the heat of the moment, and they do press send in anger. So you might get a little bit more of it. But you know what's happened with the story since it happened is very much an old politics story. You know,
there is a difference in the platform as well, in that audiences, the public voters, have a direct route to that person that, were he to have done a gaffe on broadcast or on print, can be managed through the usual media channels. He's now got direct relationships with all those people that he's responsible for managing.
There are plenty of people who use Twitter as a one-way avenue of communication. Barack Obama was one of them. Those who continue to tweet within his team still, and I don't think do you believe there's an expectation on the part of the public reading that Twitter feed that if they send an @message, they're going to get a response from
I
them?
think on Twitter there's no such thing as one group called the public. I think there are a number of groups with different expectations.
Krishnan, you were talking there just about the fact this wouldn't have happened, a good few years ago, back in the old media days. But isn't the problem amplified to an extent, given what Chris, Paul were saying earlier on about the echo chamber effect of the blogosphere, the Twittersphere at the moment, that the people that you are speaking to are the people who are looking for a page 2 lead the next day, who are about to step in front of the camera and do a two-way? I mean, isn't the problem amplified by social media?
Yeah, to some extent, yes, because it's quicker and more immediate. I mean, if we now live in a 24-hour media world in which the political parties have to respond much more quickly to political running stories than they did 10 years ago or 15 years ago, they're having to do it even more quickly in the age of social media because the story is running and running. And it's taking on the sort of second or third iteration of the story within a couple of hours, on social media, and then that gets picked up on Sky News or somewhere else, and it's and it circles around. So the parties are going to have to be a lot cleverer and a lot quicker in terms of the way they respond to these sorts of stories. So it's amplifying to that extent. I mean, I think the thing we've just got to be careful about is not to expect Twitter to produce a new kind of story or social media to produce a new kind of story. They're all the same old stories. It's just that they're in new medium, new media now, and it's a lot quicker.
And nobody quite has figured out the rules yet.
It does speak, I think, though, to a wider culture whereby there is, for some odd reason, it's very hard for people when they make mistakes to apologise. And I think tools like Twitter actually make the process more open and more transparent. And
how many apologies have you seen on Twitter that have been repeated in front of the cameras?
In what sense?
Well, as you say, it makes it easier.
But that's, I think, what Twitter does. It amplifies the best and the worst of human communications. It amplifies how people interact, how people collaborate, how they communicate with each other. And in most cases, it's been very, very positive. Now we're starting to get examples where the negative sides of the way people communicate, i.e. if they make mistakes, they very rarely apologize, and it's amplifying the negative side. I think the good thing of all of this is that it's because it does amplify, it's an opportunity for media, for politicians, etc., to hopefully become more open. Next time something like this happens, hopefully politicians will be wiser and will apologise. And
I think the experience so far is that they're all slightly chaotic and none of them really know how to do it or how to deal with it.
Absolutely true.
Sean Simon cracked some joke about Suzanne Boyle, didn't he, a year ago or so? And he pretty quickly went, sorry.
Yeah.
Delete, sorry, and then it died. Mm-hmm. So that's the approach, the Blair move on kind of approach.
Is there though, Chris, anything markedly different between the echo chamber effect, which we all concede takes place in the blogosphere, the Twittersphere, and a group of hacks who have been on the plane with the Prime Minister, getting together in a huddle after their chat with the Prime Minister and agreeing what the story is by the time they get back to base?
Yeah, I think there's something different about the fact that the audience has an unmediated access to those statements. I think it's a different thing, and I don't think we've worked out what the rules are yet. It's difficult. It's more difficult to manage news when the audience has a direct relationship with those people who are the source.
You mentioned unmediated access to information. Wikipedia, for example, puts itself forward as this repository for the world's knowledge, but it's heavily mediated by its team of editors. I Spy MP, latest innovation in Westminster, you email this email account and it will stick up on Twitter your eyewitness accounts of what's been going on with a politician that you bumped into. Unfettered access to information is as dangerous, is it not?
Am I the spokesman for the internets now?
No, absolutely not. But digital strategy in your title, you're going to get asked a few questions about it.
Yes. I think unfettered access to anything is a dangerous thing, but so's fire, and we need fire. I think just because something's dangerous, you don't shy away from it. You engage.
You might
with it.
treat it with kid gloves, perhaps.
You might throw a steak on it. Who knows? Probably wouldn't throw petrol on it though, would you?
I Spy is mediated though. There is an editor, and not everything gets through, as I've learned.
You had to try as well, then,
we all
didn't
had
you?
a try. But today's the day when I Spy sort of had its first scoop validated. I Spy last week had reported Branson going into Cameron's office. Today, Branson backs Cameron's policy. We can see a causal link there. Okay,
I also noticed Henry McCrory, head of press for the Conservatives, twittering something, and then 2 minutes later appearing on I Spy MP. Now, I'm not going to accuse Henry of having sent that particular email. Perhaps someone else just copied it. But it's a tool that's as open to abuse as anything else which doesn't pass through the hands of a blogger, a journalist, a presenter.
I don't know. I think you'd have to ask. I have my theories about I Spy, and I think our man next door to us might be able to help.
He's behind I Spy.
Alberto, anything to add at this point on I Spy and where it came from?
We actually don't know. I think it's definitely something we're interested in and very supportive of initiatives which open up politics. But beyond that, I don't know who's behind it.
I originally thought, oh shit, I've got new competition, and now I see it as quite helpful.
I'm told that frontline event audiences are always very keen to get involved, so I'm going to try and take a couple of questions or a couple of points as often as we can. But perhaps just on the first issue, the way that the blogosphere, the Twitter sphere, seem to exist at a remove, perhaps, from certain areas of Westminster. I'm just looking for anyone who is of the opinion that social media will be not just an important factor, but a key factor come the time of the next election, and just why. An event advertised on Twitter. There we are. So if you could just give us your name and...
Yeah, Mark Rock from Audioboo, which is a...
Sorry, Mark, is that on? Yes. Mark Rock from Audioboo.
Sponsors.
Sponsors, indeed. I think the point that Chris made, which is the unmediated access, is a huge one. I think in every election before now, all your contact with MPs has been mediated either by broadcasters or by syndication experts like this. And I think even if you look at the amount of PPCs are on Twitter, it's potentially far greater than MPs. They are showing a much huger interest in the platform. Even if the campaign itself is not a huge social media one, I think the people actually coming to Parliament are going to be much more aware and powerful of how powerful social media is.
Anyone else? Gentleman just over there. I certainly think you're right. We are going to see an evolution of an entirely different breed of MP the other side of this general election. Sorry.
Yeah, Max Easterman. I'm a freelance journalist and journalism trainer. I just wondered whether, and again this is addressed to Chris, because I'm very interested in the point you made about audiences self-organising through Twitter, whether we're likely to see a kind of digital phenomenon such as we've previously seen when, in America particularly, but increasingly in this country, where voters or constituents decide that they don't like the way an MP is behaving, and they organise, or they don't like the way that the constituency party is behaving towards its MP, and they organise to do something about it. Do you think that Twitter is going to actually become a means by which, for example, constituents might decide that a particular MP or a particular candidate really can be targeted through the digital medium?
I'll give you a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is no. The advantage that people who live in a constituency have is that they all live near each other, so they don't necessarily need Twitter. They can have a meeting in a church hall. Where I think Twitter or social media platforms, and there will be others, Twitter will live and die like anything else, are interesting in terms of self-organisation, might actually be in the sort of grassroots thing that's not about big P party politics, it's about small p politics. So there's groups like Transition Towns, and there's groups around sustainability that are organising in a small way and doing things on local and national and levels around food or topics like food or transport, and they're slightly disengaged. These are small, but these are politicised people, but they're not party politicised people, and they're using these tools to engage and to organise themselves to do things.
Remind me of that move into the party.
We will get into the date. Just a couple. We'll come back to some questions in a second. But I mean, anyone in this country who is looking to use, social networking as a tool to organise support must surely be looking across the Atlantic at the Obama victory there, and perhaps even a little bit earlier. I mean, 4 years earlier, Dean and his ability to raise money from,
But hang on, it's happening already. I mean, what you're talking about has been happening for ages on Facebook, and there are massive campaigns and people organised.
The point being, where is the top-down direction? Obama's team had, in the run-up to election.
Well, that's the point of social media. It's not top-down.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not controlled by the party. Now, the point is, how are the parties going to be able to make this?
The parties will try and do their own things, and each of the parties will try this election, and they already are. From myconservatives.com, to have their online strategy, but where social media is really interesting is not watching how parties just use it as another place to advertise, but as where you see people organising, and you are seeing people organising very, very quickly.
That's not where Obama was most successful. Obama was most successful in setting up his private network.
Obviously they'll try and emulate that this election, and none of them will succeed because we don't have the same kind of moment that existed when Obama was getting everyone from taxi drivers to students to organise meetings in their front rooms.
And also the relationship between the public and the funding of party politics is different.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you're outside CCHQ pool.
They could use social networks to generate expenses, perhaps.
You're outside CCHQ. But you have, seen it firsthand. Their team. I mean, just across the board. I mean, where are the British political parties compared to where the Democrats certainly were, pretty close to the start of the presidential election campaign, and the Republicans were getting to by the end of it?
Both Labour and the Tories have invested in their own social networks. So Labour's got Labour Space and Labour's Net, a bit cheap and cheerful, but it works. They can do things like organised phone banking, which is where you go online, you get phone numbers for people to call, and you can call them from home. Tories have got My Conservatives, spent a lot more money on it, and that's slightly, it's just taking off now. They want to use it for fundraising.
It's just speaking to activists, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's only for internal. It's not like Obama. But then there's something that isn't controlled by the parties, say, for instance, like Conservative Home. Now, that's a website that all the activists go on, all the shadow cabinet goes on, and everybody in politics has a quick look at now and then. That site decides whether shadow cabinet ministers rise or fall. I mean, Tim Montgomery has taken out Alan Duncan when he got into a bit of trouble. All of a sudden, him and Alan Duncan have a bit previous. He commissions a poll on whether Alan Duncan should go, and runs it big, and Duncan's gone. So he's got a lot of power from what is, in a sense, a community site. It's a sort of Tory community site. That when they're trying to sell the change in European policy, William Hague goes off to beg and bow to Tim Montgomery, the editor of that site, for permission to change policy, basically.
I want to come on to the kind of the dangers inherent in this strategy in just a moment, but Alberto, I mean, we're looking at the situation in America was, like a lumpet. President Obama's team had the steady hand on the tiller when it came to managing their internet, their Web 2.0 output, and that just doesn't seem to be there. I'll give you an example. We had Barack Obama releasing on Flickr the photos of his behind-the-scenes inauguration. We have David Cameron hiring a photographer to take pictures of him leaning over poppies outside Westminster Abbey. I mean, why have the British parties not been able to commandeer, to corral the troops perhaps, I mean, Paul was mentioning Tim Montgomery there. Why have the parties not been able to corral the troops in a way that they were able to do across the Atlantic?
I think the short answer, I think Krishnan's point too, is there is no Barack Obama, and beyond the technology, the person who's running for office is actually the key element in whatever
Tories seem to think that he is.
That's what they think. I think then the longer answer is the big difference between Obama's campaign and Howard Dean's campaign, for example, is Obama's campaign very, very had an incredible balance between what was coming from the top and how the grassroots were involved. The messages and the key points and were all very much candidate lines. And sure, lots of people on the in the grassroots engage around these, coalesce around them, mashed them up and created other videos and content, etc. But the fundamental points which are being distributed by lots of people were the official points that were coming from the top. And the balance between the top down and the bottom up really was a difference, I think, between Obama's campaign and Howard Dean's campaign, for example. I think what you have here is you have bits of both in the two main parties. I think the Conservatives, from a top-down level, they're very, very effective. They do use Flickr and Facebook and very, very effectively. You have all the pictures on Facebook, and you've got the YouTube videos. The latest one came out on Sunday. You have posters which people mash up. So you've got all the elements that you have in the States. I think Labour has almost the other side of the equation. There's lots of grassroots passion, but it's not very much. It's very less effectively directed and informed from the top. I wouldn't also forget, for fairness, the Lib Dems from the equation, because interestingly, they have a network called Lib Dem Act, which they use Ning, which is less talked about compared to my Conservatives and Labour's networks, but actually it's very, very effective in terms of engaging their members, and is probably more active than the other sites.
You know something, all the money that Obama raised, all the hundreds of millions, what did they do with it? Spend it on TV advertising. So TV is still pretty important.
Let's not underestimate the importance of broadcast news in this upcoming election campaign.
Can I add something? It's an absolutely excellent point. If there, of all the platforms that are available in this multi-platform digital election, if there's one media thing that's going to be really, really interesting, it won't really be Twitter. I think it will be the debates, which will be broadcast. Now, Twitter will have a very, very interesting back channel, but those will be never seen before television events in UK politics.
We're talking about a medium that has existed, since the early part of the 20th century.
It still has
power. And we're still talking about it as the game changer.
I think the events on that medium.
Exactly.
This is the mass medium in terrestrial television terms. I mean, and that's why, if you want to advertise to people commercially, ITV is still the place to do it.
Without letting us go into the merits of the leaders' debate and the key role that my boss Adam played in bringing it all about.
I promise you one thing, it won't be the Twitter what won it.
Well, I want to try and bring it back to that, though. Krishnan, you're the chap who's tasked with telling the public what has been going on any particular day. I think there are two things I'd be interested to hear from you. First, a kind of an appraisal of where the parties are on utilising social media to try and get us interested in the story. And the other side of that, I think, the other side of the coin is, I think, the dangers inherent in use of social media. We've seen the David Wright story today. We also had the brief Twitter storm about Eric Pickles inviting Tory bloggers into CCHQ, being told this is the dirtiest election campaign, and that's where you come in. Now, we all know the truth of the remarks that were made that night, but we broadcasters, we tend to leap on a quote out of context, even from people that are being brought in by the party heads. There are huge dangers involved in the parties pushing themselves down these largely untravelled routes of social networking.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think none of the parties have really got it right, in that they're all very, very cautious. And they're all trying to sort of get their heads around it in unofficial and official ways. And the Conservatives are certainly doing an awful lot more now than they were 6 months ago, for example. But it still tends to be quite one-way traffic, I think. If you're talking to if you're trying to talk to senior Conservatives on Twitter, it's quite difficult because there's not an awful lot of interaction. It's still pretty much a flow of information, a way of promoting their wares, directing you to websites, directing you to debates that are going on Conservative Home or wherever it might be, or just alerting you to a big row. And Labour centrally. Again, are sort of, they're kind of not really there. There's a very big Labour presence on Twitter, but it's a very unofficial one. It's the John Prescott lot and Alistair Campbell and then a lot of the foot soldiers, if you like, who are very, very vocal. But in terms of Labour HQ, its Twitter presence is not terribly noticeable.
But that brings us kind of back to the point that Paul was making. There are several very high-profile Conservative bloggers, some of whom appear to be on the leash. On odd occasions they will step out of line. But as you mentioned, Tim Montgomery, they're incredibly influential in the Conservative blogosphere, Twitter sphere. I mean, there are some real problems ahead for the Conservatives if Tim doesn't get his way on Europe, if Tim doesn't get his way on defence, if Tim doesn't get his way on...
I mean, there's a lot of boring stuff going on that people don't realise. The mailing list, the broad Conservative right has more people on its mailing list than the party does officially. So, and I build up a mailing list. There are reasons we've been working on that kind of issue, so that after the election, when the Cameroons feel they owe the right nothing, we'll be able to go straight to the activists and reach them and make trouble.
Oh, but let's be fair about it. The bloggers that are active, the Daniel Hanans of this world, tend to fall pretty firmly right of centre. I mean, where is the modernising wing of the Conservative Party when it comes to the blogosphere?
Well, we have a small clique in charge of the Conservative Party, who are successful. So,
you mentioned we. Yeah.
No, we.
No, oh, sorry.
We have a small clique in charge. So that's the situation. And the right is in abeyance because it feels, well, they're winning. So we'll let them have their head. But what do you think the Taxpayers Alliance is going to do the day after the election? Sit there and do nothing? No, they'll be fighting tooth and nail to prevent the VAT hike. I
mean, in those circumstances, Chris, is it right to have these people, coming into Labour HQ, coming into Tory HQ, Cowley Street as well, of course, when they are not officially part of the overall media strategy?
Yes, who decides what's official and not anymore?
Generally the party apparatus.
The parties are a fantastic exercise in discipline and control. These platforms are ill-disciplined and difficult to control. Parties are going to have to live with that.
When you say going to have to live with that, I mean, I read an interesting piece on, I can't remember what it was, it wasn't Left Foot Forward, it's something similar, arguing that Tim Montgomery was the most dangerous man in the Conservative blogosphere. Right. I mean, at what point do they stop sending him the press releases?
The time you really pissed them off, they say. I mean, they take me off the ops, for people who don't know what the ops advice is, you get these things not for broadcast, not for, maybe I'm telling you what you already know, where perhaps Cameron's going to give a speech. If I've been a naughty boy in the last few weeks, I don't get those invitations, so I don't get to have a photo and all that kind of stuff, and you know how that works. But they are kind of trying to mediate with the affiliated bloggers, the Tory bloggers. But Labour has got all these sites springing up, not to win the election, but to fight the civil war after the election. Yeah. That's what they're all gaming. That's what it was all about.
You've got Left Foot Forward.
Left Foot Forward, Labour List, this is...
Labour List, as you will remember, has been around for quite some time.
Yeah, the new model Labour List is going to, I bet you will be backing Progress's candidate, maybe Purnell, whatever, and Compass will be doing their thing. So that's what this is all about. This is the organisation, the extra party organisations to fight the factional wars.
So let's speak specifics now. I mean, what do the Labour Party have to do, Alberto, if they are to fill the war chest to a sufficient level? How can they harness social media to try and boost what at the time being appears to be a pretty lackadaisical stream of cash into their coffers?
I think you need to ask that to the Labour Party. I think social media, specifically in terms of the Labour Party, is they should look at which are their strengths and their assets in terms of social media, and it is lots of very passionate individuals and a relatively high number of individuals using these tools, and try and leverage on that passion a little bit more strategically.
Rather than just deploying Bevanite Ellie to send out hundreds of tweets a day. For those that don't tweet, well done, or not, Bevanite Ellie is essentially kind of unofficial cheerleader for the Labour Party, allied to Kerry McCarthy, a Labour MP who's their official online digital electronic czar. But there still does seem to be, particularly on the Labour side, perhaps not so much even on the Lib Dem side, that there is this disconnect between this body of activists that are out there that want to see the party do well, that want to even donate money to the party, but they're not so closely allied to Labour HQ to make any difference in the polls.
I think beyond the polls, I think the challenge is that there isn't a set of uniform messages and strategic direction. There are there's lots of noise. There's lots of attacks to the other parties, and there's lots of positive things which they feel the government and their party does. But it's all very random and messy. And I think what it needs is a bit of glue and strategic direction that puts that all
There's a
together.
big difference between the Tories and Labour's approach. I mean, the Tories basically unofficially boycott Twitter. Not officially, but unofficially. And that's because their digital team sees the importance of Facebook, where 20 million people, that's half the registered voters, I think, or something like that, and they can target on advertising on Facebook to millions, i.e., it might actually make a difference in a vote to people. They can send out a message to people about inheritance tax who are old via Twitter, via Facebook. You know, that's mass reach. They can go on LinkedIn, you know, another social network, well, we're getting Twitter obsessed, and they can put ads on there which reach small business people. I mean, the Tories are quietly doing a lot of that stuff, getting no coverage, and they like it that way.
Yeah. Let's try and open this out just now, actually, and try and get a couple of comments from people about on the specific point. You know, the merits, the demerits, to use the Americanism, of utilising social media so close to an election campaign where, let's be fair about it, the party is not particularly well practiced. This gentleman down here has been staring at me intently for a while, so let's just give him the microphone.
For weeks.
I'm David from 38 Degrees, and we're a non-party political grassroots campaigning organisation. We've grown to 70,000 members since we launched 6 months ago, and my sense from that experience, we're drawing a lot on what Move On did in the States, is that there are two conversations going on social media. There's one that's quite an elite conversation, but with barriers broken down between media classes and the political classes. And there are quite different conversations going on out there, and ironically, at a time when the technology breaks down barriers, there are, in lots of other ways, much bigger emotional barriers and cultural barriers between those people. And I think that's probably going to be the more interesting way in which social media is in operation during this election, is we'll start to see the beginnings of grassroots operations outside of the party structure, which will probably ultimately change things, but probably not at this election. So Barack Obama, I think, was the culmination of 8 years of stuff that started very much outside the party with Move On, then kind of started to infiltrate the party with the Howard Dean campaign in 2004, and then was, you know, loads of techniques which in lots of ways are very scary to a party were appropriated and adopted by 2008. And in 38 Degrees' case, 3,000 people have just helped us write our election strategy online. One of the key focuses that has come out of that is the TV debates, and a real fear from our members that the TV debates will be choreographed, will be stage managed, it will be mediated between those people, so the two are going to interact in that way.
Perfect. I'm going to try and get a few other people in here at the moment. And sorry, you were wanting to speak from the last time around. So, and then we will move further back. Sorry, down there.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks. All right. If you could just tell us your name and where you're from.
My name's Gabrielle. My Twitter handle's Gabrielle NYC, so I put that in. For full transparency, I've been on both sides of the fence. I worked out on number 10 many years ago, handling PR for my sins. And in the last 3 weeks, definitely, I've been approached by a lot of local MPs and hope to be MPs, to help them put their social media strategies together. And it's going back to this disconnect. And but none of them want me to take it over. They want instruction in setting up those platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, coordinating them, and almost giving them a hand-holding week to say, right, this is how it works, now it's up to you.
And these are where the pitfalls are, presumably, as well.
Well, it's where the pitfalls are, but I think you're getting this direct grassroots. People can actually...
Are these all Labour
talk to
MPs?
No, they're not. No. Because I was actually at number 10 when the Tories were there.
Because the Tories are getting quite a lot of help, as far as I can tell, centrally.
And the thing with Barack Obama is, full disclosure, I have a friend who was on the campaign in the White House.
You should really be up here, quite
Absolutely.
frankly, I'm sorry.
Maybe next time. And they had a long, very tight build-up. They had years to build this up. We're going to have 6 weeks, and that makes a big difference.
Let's be fair about it, and perhaps someone else might want to pick up on this. We have had, it's 2005 was the last election where the internet kind of really did start to play an active role because of the blogs, first of all, and then because of, just the joined-up thinking that was able to take place.
But when you've got an end date, you work towards that end date. That's what I'm saying.
True, but I mean, hasn't everyone been on an election footing since 2006? Anyone else who wants to make it? Sorry, yes, lady there.
I'm wondering if that social media is the missing link in this election, because in 2005 there was some grassroots campaigns that were growing up, like John Harris's Who Do We Vote For Now, and Billy Bragg was involved in something matching Liberal Democrat and Labour voters in different constituencies, trying to get Conservative MPs out. And I feel that if social media had been around in 2005, it could have been a very different election, and there's obviously more up for grabs this time with it being closer. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the grassroots element takes off. And I agree with Paul as well. I think Facebook is the thing that might, at this stage, be the key social media site, because there's more people on it, more women on it, and it's not just a media and politician thing.
But I think what we've yet to see is any evidence that it is anyone other than activists or people who are already engaged in politics who are getting involved in any of this stuff on the social media platforms, because certainly on Twitter, political debate is terrible. I think it's really, really straight down the line. You stink, no, you stink, and you end up switching away from a lot of it. And similarly on Facebook, a lot the campaigns are join my club, and it's the people who would join clubs anyway. So I think the big missing question at the moment is, how do you draw people who are not traditionally interested in politics into this because they are interested in a broader conversation? And I think the answer probably is 38 Degrees and other campaigns where people are just interested in an issue.
But that then begs the other question. I mean, 38 Degrees, for example, does a lot of its campaigning online. Are we in a situation now where where we are absolutely certain that the vast majority of voters, of aged voters, are in a position to pick up Ian Dale's comments on his blogs, Nick Robinson's, yours? I mean, this is the one thing that hasn't yet been established, is the reach of these social media. And as I was saying earlier on, now, Sky News, we can hold our hands up here and say that we certainly don't get the terrestrial viewing figures of Channel 4 News. But Carter would say that we were on his desktop every day whilst he was sitting in his office. You speak to a certain group of people. Is that enough, though?
Well, the only 2 YouTube videos that have gone over 1 million in this country, I think, are Dan Hannon's speech, which is partly because it caught on in the States, and Gordon Brown picking his nose. So ask yourself how much political stuff is happening.
These are the people I'm going to be getting up tomorrow morning at 4 o'clock to tell them about politics for.
I think Subo would give them a run for the money.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if this what the spin doctors call cut through. Is it really going through past and to the ordinary people? And also, do they really care? Nancy on Ice had 7 million viewers. As soon as Piers Morgan had Gordon on, 3 million. You know, so people aren't interested in politics, and the politicians have to figure out how to force it onto them.
I'm not sure people aren't interested in politics. I think there is...
Not interested in politicians.
I think there's a declining interest in party politics for a host of reasons. I think people are still interested in the issues of politics. They still care about the things that matter to them in their lives.
No, I think that's the point. If you see politics purely as a race between 2 or 3 big players, then it's not going to be any more interesting online than it is offline. But what we certainly find is huge viewer engagement over particular issues that are political issues that people care about, or if you point out that something's wrong, if you point out somebody got their facts wrong, people are very turned on by that kind of thing, because that's not a party political thing, that's a sort of, oh, it's another lying bastard kind of issue.
But how does that translate for the parties into a departure from the traditional print a leaflet, stick it through the letterbox, follow up with a knock on the door a couple of days after?
Well, I'm not interested in writing a political strategy for political parties. I'm interested in working out how we cover it and how we respond to the conversation that's going on out there. So, I don't care what they do. I mean, I don't think they've got a clue, to be perfectly honest.
I think I'd agree with you on that, but doesn't that make our job that much more difficult?
No, I think it makes our job a lot easier.
We sit in our offices with our laptop and our PC, we're checking our Twitter feed, we're looking on Facebook, we're reading the blogs, we're sitting, obviously, the wires running constantly. We're the ones who are plugged into the matrix, and we're speaking to people who aren't. But, I mean, is their experience not vastly different to that of ours living in the Westminster bubble?
Absolutely. I think what's really missing is, as mentioned before, it's less about the tools, it's more about it's more about the message, the sense of purpose, why should you knock on a door to get this politician elected? Why should you vote for this party? How is that going to have an impact on my life? Why should I be part of this movement? And what's really missing is that type of messaging, sense of purpose, which are the values and that proposition, and how does that have an impact on people, and how can people participate in shaping that vision and sense of purpose? Because if that's not there, and I think that was very clear in the Obama campaign, and then once you've got that sorted, then you can think about which tools on and offline do you use to communicate and get people to mobilize around that vision. But if you don't have that first, it makes whatever tool you use, the debate will be very shallow, and people will just rally behind whatever party they support, because they've always done that. It doesn't really matter what the parties say.
There is, though, I think, from a political correspondent's point of view, there's certainly an opportunity presenting itself to Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, of course. Lifelong Labour voters are now looking for somewhere else to go. I mean, Chris, you obviously, as you said, you're not involved in the strategy for these parties, but you are involved in the digital media. I mean, how can they capitalise on this uncertainty onto the part of a lot of people, particularly when it comes to marginal constituencies?
Given the time that we have between now and the election, the chances of them getting organised and getting a strategy to use social media to do that stuff by the time of the election is nil. In the longer term, the chap over there, I think, is onto something. I think listen a bit more and talk a bit less. The lady over there said, is Facebook the missing link? Absolutely, it's not. Facebook is definitely a piece of the jigsaw, because it does have a much wider, a much broader, much more relevant demographic. There's more people on it than Twitter, which is a bubble. But there isn't a missing link. Politicians and journalists like big ideas and big stories and missing links. And the thing that these tools enable is lots of people to do lots of little things rather than one big thing. And so so short term for the election, no, they're not going to none of them are going to turn around and do anything particularly spectacular. But in the longer term, if they want to change how their relationship with people, they need to talk a bit less and listen a bit more. And this is a great platform for them to do it.
I mean, wasn't that one of the successes of the Obama campaign, as well as the obvious fundraising aspect of it? It was that it empowered people who were perhaps not immediately before, were not, necessarily Obama fans, were not necessarily Democrats, but it gave them a stake. Or at least it gave them the impression of having a stake.
Possibly the latter. I think it was Alberto who said earlier. I think the great thing about the Obama campaign was the candidate. what a product to market that was, and are the products that the social media strategists do they measure up? I'm just not sure they're as clean.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sure. No, there's a microphone up there. I mean, it's certainly true, though, isn't it, that we are at something of a crossroads for the British media, for the British public. We've all dipped our toes in the water, but we are absolutely blindsided as to whether or not this is going to have, any significant effect on voter intent.
That's really the question I was going to ask. I'm Patrick from the Frontline Club. With voter turnout diminishing, and it was only a few months ago that we were all told on a daily basis in news bulletins and op-ed pages that this was the worst crisis in the history of politics, and that MPs are the most hated people in our society, and there may be some remnants of that. Would it not be a massive own goal for Parliament at the time when Facebook and Twitter and things like that, and people are connecting online? Would it not be a huge missed opportunity if voter turnout among first-time voters and young people doesn't increase at the next election? And what can they do to increase that? And similarly, what about the media, the people on the stage and some people in the audience? What do they need to do to get people tuning in and finding out not just who to vote for, but what Parliament actually is?
Paul, do you want to handle the new media side? I mean, what needs to be done?
I wanted to go to the point about voter turnoff and youth turnoff. If the product's crap, people won't buy it. And we have two parties, maybe three parties, who are pretty undifferentiated in their offering. Slightly different. No radical. This is not the 1980s. This is a time when both parties are arguing slight nuances on it, and you don't have a radical choice in front of you. When you don't have a radical choice, it's not very interesting, and we don't have extremely charismatic political leaders who have appeal. And if they're all fighting over the centre ground, it's not much of a banner to march behind, is it? So I think there's a product problem that isn't going to be changed by a different type of advertising, which is what we're talking about.
In terms of those of us in the mainstream media, I mean, we've had to be so cognizant over the past 24 months of the effect that social media has upon us. I mean, now is the time for us, surely, to appraise whether or not we should be devoting as much attention to updating on Twitter, blogging, rather than doing what ultimately is.
I really don't agree. I mean, I don't think it's time to appraise anything. I think all of these things are things that happen. I talk to people, I ring people, I go and cover events, I tweet. It's just another thing. It's another way of talking to people, and it's another way of staying in touch. And if you have a Twitter strategy, then it's probably shit. You shouldn't have a Twitter strategy. You should just tweet. And it is like talking,
Just
and
like David
if you're
Wright,
thinking about it too much, then you're doing it wrong. Because the point is, this is about communication, and and this is about getting your message out. If you're a commercial company or a political party, or if you're a media organisation, it's about telling people what you're doing and about finding out what they're interested in. So no, I don't. I'm not interested in Twitter stories anymore. I mean, I agree with you on that. We shouldn't ever do a story because there's always a little interesting thing about social media. It's a story if it's a story. I mean, the Labour Whip story, has to be assessed in its own terms. Has he screwed up? Is he in trouble? Is this story going anywhere? Yeah. It's not interesting because it happened on Twitter.
I totally agree. If it had been email or mobile phone, or he just shouted it in his underpants, he just buggered up, didn't he?
But unfortunately, I know from personal experience that there are those who are operating on the digital strategy side who would rather have everyone contributing to Twitter, rather have everyone having a Facebook page that people can become fans of, would rather have that type of thing. I'm
now a spokesman for digital strategists.
I'm merely giving the social media guru for some who work in 24-hour media.
No, I think some media organisations are now telling their people, their on-screen people, that you must join Twitter, you must join Facebook, you must do this.
It's more than that. It's whether or not, as a journalist, as opposed to a blogger, does 3-4 a day, someone who's monitoring other people's tweets, someone who does an hour programme a day, whether as a journalist you are best placed to analyse and then report what you have seen during an election campaign when you've been twittering, blogging, phoning in. That's my point there. I mean, is there not a sense in
Well,
which...
if you're doing that and not getting out there and seeing things for real, then yes.
You won't get
But
a
I
scoop.
mean,
I tell my interns, stop looking at TweetDeck. We're not going to get a scoop of TweetDeck. You know, it's just a waste of time.
Serves to confirm that which you'd either heard before or that which you probably knew
Oh, look, I
already.
found out what someone else has already reported. Well, that's not that interesting.
Okay, let's look at the idea of those people within British society who are not on Twitter, not on Facebook, not part of any of these, monomaniacal, social networking sites. I mean, how do we reconcile the two? On the one hand, these are people that have probably been quite set in their ways in terms of their voting for a number of years, who receive the bump through the letterbox every day, read it, discard, probably even just shred it when it comes through the door. How do we then target this as yet unfathomable, in terms of size, this unfathomable part of the British electorate?
Well, some of my best friends are digital strategists, and they don't bother with those people because they don't vote. That's the end of it. You know, those people don't vote. They're not worth trying to reach.
Chris, I mean, as PA, I mean, you serve the media.
Yeah. So in terms of the people who are not on Twitter, they're probably quite poor, and there is a huge correlation.
That sounds like an absolutely ridiculous thing.
There's a huge correlation with certainly broadband access and social demographics. Absolutely, and so which is why I think while this is a hugely interesting thing, don't forget the broadcast and don't forget the press and the debates that will be going on in broadcast, yourselves and BBC ITV will be a huge part of the next election. So in terms of so you do two things. You don't forget the mass media, and then whatever strategies you have through, whether it's Digital Britain or Martha Lane Fox or Helen Milner at UK Online Sentence, you work to get people who aren't online and show them the benefits of being part of the conversation.
And where would you break a story first?
It depends on the story. I mean, we are increasingly breaking stories online. I would say Channel 4 News has been a little late to come to the party on this, but we're getting our heads around it now, and we're increasingly putting our video and edited packages on the website before they go out on air at 7 o'clock. We're then tweeting those links and saying, if you want to see the story, you can see it. If it's a massive scoop that we would then be worried about the 6 o'clock news picking it up and pretending it was theirs, then we're not going to do that. If it's something that's got to be, got to wait for, standing up at 7 o'clock and saying we've got the story, then obviously we're going to wait until broadcast. But I think increasingly more and more of our sort of daily coverage and features and films and just interesting stuff will go online before it goes on TV.
I think it's happening pretty much across the board in terms of the MSM anyway. The web really is the way that we put things out there. Now, most of you, I imagine, will have heard of this online in some form or another. I mean, I'm just interested to find if there are any people here who perhaps are not quite as heavily involved in social media as those that are sitting up here. Who have any thoughts on how this might play out in the election? I mean, is there anyone here who doesn't have a Twitter account, for example? There must be a few. Chaps straight at the back there. I mean, does it bother you that you're not able to keep up to date with my 140 character tweets?
I'll wait for the microphone.
It doesn't sound very poor to me.
Fight the power, Channel 4.
Cultural influences I work in political lobbying myself for an agency, so I have a few colleagues who fill me in on, and I occasionally read Paul's items on his site. I'm interested to ask the panel, in a way, a general election notwithstanding, how Twitter and this sort of thing affects journalism generally speaking, and if what we're doing is creating journalists who essentially are just listening to a broader field of gossip and cutting budgets for investigatory journalism, then are we not just really seeing journalism second-hand or third-hand or fourth-hand, when if to be a great journalist now means sitting at a desk with a computer screen or four, whereas it used to be being out there in the field for sometimes as long as weeks getting a story and
But that, I mean, no one is doing that, for the truth. I mean, what you've got is, in a lot of newsrooms, you have a lot of people who are newsroom-based, who are basically, you know, processing news, to a large degree, particularly on the news channels. You know, you've got pictures coming in from outside the building, you've got wire copy coming in, people processing it, and if they're monitoring Twitter, it's like monitoring another wire service. And increasingly, people use it as a wire service. Sorry,
is it? I mean, there is a difference.
No, there's a difference between where you get your information. Obviously, if you're listening to people you don't know who they are and taking their Twitter as gospel truth, then that's a problem. You know, you should use your critical journalistic skills with any tweet as you would anywhere else. But a lot of news organisations now are tweeting first. So newsroom journalists are often using Twitter as a wire service so that you know what the New York Times have just put up, or the Guardian, or Sky News.
But again, what we're talking about here, though, is the echo chamber.
Yeah.
Once again, it's the same news bouncing around a few people.
Yeah,
until it makes its way onto a
news hasn't
terrestrial
changed.
bulletin
News is still
or
what
onto the front
journalists
pages.
go out there and find out.
Yeah. I mean, the point I don't understand, though, I think, why are we assuming that you can't do both? I think that's the key point. We're assuming you either go out and write up a story and then report it, or I sit in front of my computer all day and tweet, when actually you can do both. You can go out, you can gather information to write a story, and while you're doing that, you could tweet something, and you can look for information.
I think unfortunately it goes to the immediacy of the 24-hour environment. But I mean, the McCain camp themselves complained about the fact that they would have a huddle, and then rather than asking a supplementary question, everyone would dash off to the laptops, dig out their mobile phones, and tweet the news.
McCain should have done that directly himself without. I think there's things.
No, that's
where,
the thing. Then you're talking about McCain
is
tweeting something to them that they react to, rather than McCain speaking to journalists, you know, without invitation, without the invitation of the journalists. I mean, what's better, having the journal sitting in front of the politician, asking them questions face to face, or receiving this information that has already been mediated down to 140 characters and then putting it out there?
I think it depends on what. Not all messages are the same. There are certain messages in which 140 characters or maybe a link are sufficient. There are certain issues which are far more serious and need more time. For example, if you're talking about racism, you need someone to stand on a podium and talk for an hour and 20 minutes about racism, and there are tools that you can do that directly with people. There are bits of journalism which need much more time, much more profound analysis, and it takes time to write a proper article, to gather information, and I don't think Twitter or Facebook or any tool will ever remove the need for serious and professional.
I think where it is getting worrying though is
different bits and pieces of
where politicians are now using politicians are now using the web to cut out television journalists or print journalists altogether. So you're increasingly now seeing David Cameron sticking up a response to something or a message on video straight away, and he's not having to do what he used to have to do, which was to nip down to Millbank and face 3 or 4 different journalists knocking off clips. That's a little worrying, I think.
Is that the journalist's fault?
I think it's our fault maybe for using it, and we need to take a decision about whether we do.
I'm very, very keen on the fact that we might be getting close to running out of time. So I just want to get one more question to the panel, and then we'll open up for a bit of Q&A. We mentioned the leaders' debates earlier on this evening. What is the social media's role in reporting those debates, and how significant can they be when up against the might, if you want to call it that, of BBC, ITV News, Sky News, and the wall-to-wall coverage which we will no doubt be giving them?
I'm not sure that social media has a role in reporting those debates. I think it will be a fantastic tool, admittedly for a reasonably small strata of people this time round, to enable people who don't know who each other are and aren't in the same place to watch that debate and have a conversation about it.
Paul?
Well, in America they have the spin room afterwards. Well, what he really meant when he said that was, I think the spin room will be social media, and that, well, I know I'm contracted to one broadcaster, that after the debates I'm going to be going, and on Twitter they're saying this, and on this, they're saying that. So the social media and the bloggers will be, if you like, the spin room that you guys go for a quick poll because you can't call 100,000 people.
But is it then what they say to the public, and the public will be able to watch every single one of these debates live? They'll be able to come to their own conclusions. Is it what the politicians say that's more important, or is it what happens afterwards?
Well, it's important that from the party HQs and their spin doctors that they get the headlines they want no matter what's said. So to some extent they are trying to shape the people who are going to write the headlines and the people who are going to do the two-way to the camera, their perception of what's going on. Now, I think that as objective and as independent as you are influenced by, the consensus view to some extent. And that's part of what the game's going to be post those debates.
I mean, Chris, are you expecting your MPs that you have that you are following? I mean, are you expecting there to be broad tweeting from the Houses of Parliament during this, or perhaps better for them to keep their heads beneath the parapet, as perhaps Mr. Wright might have done?
I think they will. I think politicians will tweet a lot during the TV debates. I think as a televised event, they will have great impact because they're unprecedented, and lots of people will be hearing for a very long period of time from the leaders directly, probably for one of the first times, and I think the impact that will have on people will be very important. I think the social media back channel happening in real time will have impact on other people because it will show the raw emotions and conversations and how people are perceiving what they're saying. And I think I agree with Paul's point, how the parties participate within those conversations will be very interesting and important, and I'm confident that lots of politicians and journalists will be part of those conversations too.
I mean, Krishnan, where do you stand? I mean, just on the first of all, on the bare question, I mean, how much of a game changer are these leaders' debates going to be? And secondly, what the role is, if any, from a broadcaster's point of view, of the social media side?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to tell without without there being some massive gap. But I don't honestly think they're going to be big game changers. I think the first, the first real shame about them is how sort of predictable and cozy they are. There is no social media element. There are no real people involved. The audience involvement is a real stitch up. It's sort of, you can ask one question but you can't follow up, and it's all very cosmetic. So
was there ever an audience participation in the US debates? That was only when it got to town halls.
Well, so who cares? I mean, if the US want to have boring debates, that's up to them. I mean, this is potentially a big exercise in democracy. I'm sure it'll be interesting, and I'll be watching them gripped. And I'll be watching them as I did on Sunday night when I was watching Gordon with Piers with my laptop in front of Twitter and watching what people were saying about it, at the time. That's how exciting my Valentine's night was.
Mine was even worse. I was following you.
But I mean, I think. So I think there'll be a big response, and I think the great tragedy is that they're shut out, of the actual event.
Right. Well, there you have it. We've gone over quite a few areas tonight, so we can certainly take a few questions and try, if you have anything towards any individual member of the panel pertinent to one or more of the points that they have made. Gentleman over there, just to make it more difficult for you to get the microphone over.
Hello, it's Ben King from Channel 4 News. Just one thing we've not mentioned is Mumsnet and NetMums. They're obviously sites that the parties have identified as being very important. Do you think that they might actually be the most important social network in terms of a way of reaching floating voters and undecided and reaching beyond the Westminster bubble through the internet?
I mean, Paul, that's essentially a kind of a closed network of the type that my Barack Obama set up, isn't it?
Yeah, Mumsnet. I mean,
but without the
I noticed they're running. The Tories are running ads on Mumsnet this week, and that's an important demographic, almost as important as GMTV. Similar demographic.
I mean, Chris, are you there on that page as to the?
Am I on the Mumsnet page?
Yeah, well I was looking for a ring on your finger there. I mean, how important are these? They're not single interest groups.
I think they're important, but none of them singly is game changing, and they will grow slowly in importance. I don't think Mumsnet will be the single most important, because I think it's impossible to judge what pays you money, you take your choice.
Anyways. Yes, sorry.
I don't think that mic's working.
Hi, my name's Orla. I'm from Black Diamond TV. Basically, I wanted to ask you about social media and training for journalists. I personally worked in a referendum campaign back in Dublin. I was on the new media team, and one of the huge problems and one of the huge problems was the fact that so many people can post information online anonymously and without reference to facts. One of the great things about online media is that you can use a fact check, and this is somewhere where I think it's so important to have good journalism and editorial content. Have any of you guys ever got training on basically like weeding out the lies from the truth? Because that's what journalism's all about, and it seems like with social media it's so essential, but that's something that seems to be lost right now.
And sometimes you can sniff it out, can't you, Krishnan? I mean, the falsehoods that come through on Twitter, when everyone's trying to make it punchy and get it retweeted anyway, and when you don't know who the individual is that's actually saying that.
I think you just have to use your normal critical skills. I mean, and it's not as if we would ever just read out Twitter as a primary source of information on anything. Unless it was checked. So
got a picture of the
same
plane
rules
that
apply,
crashed in the Hudson. We've certainly used. Well, yeah, but there are certain instances where pictures have been used. There are certain instances where we've used Twitter to get hold of interviewees and things like that. But once you get hold of the interviewee, you're obviously going to check who they are. You're not just going to sort of put them on air, because they say, oh yeah, I'm at the scene of a bomb, and my Twitter name is liar. So you have to just use all the normal critical skills and what journalism requires with any social media as you would with anything.
I think it's absolutely it should be treated in the same way you would treat any source. I remember I was talking to a journalist at The Guardian when they wrote the piece about David Miliband and Michael Jackson's death, and my question to that journalist was, if someone rang you up and said, I'm David Miliband and I think this, would you publish that?
That was truly appalling that that got on. It was so obvious from reading his Twitter that it wasn't.
You would ring up the office, you would verify if the source is credible, and it's exactly the same thing with Twitter. You would try and verify the source.
Anyone else? Sorry, Lydia.
I'm a digital strategist for a branding agency.
Which one?
Moving Brands.
Sorry, I just wanted to check.
Everyone talks about the success of the Obama campaign, but when he actually got into the White House, the rules and restraints of the White House meant that he couldn't use the platforms that he had to kind of pass ideas that he wanted to in the way that he had for the campaign and get that kind of support. How much do you think, this is to the whole panel, how much do you think that the restraints of Parliament and the parties are what's holding the success of social media back, or is it just a lack of strategy, let alone digital strategy?
It wasn't the biggest problem for Obama that his security team told him he couldn't Twitter from his BlackBerry. I mean, you only need to look at
yeah,
exactly. You only need to look at the Commons chamber to see how many people are actually looking at the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition, to see how many of them are furiously hammering away at that. I mean, sorry, Chris. I mean, you're from a wire service. You guys are used to speaking to the politicians, often ahead of the rest of the media. I mean, where do they? I mean, are there any pitfalls for them in kind of going around you and trying to put things out there by themselves?
Absolutely, and Krishnan explained it before that. This is disintermediation, isn't it? The source can go direct to the audience. It is a problem. It's a huge structural problem for the media to work out, and it takes 2 steps forwards and 1 step backwards trying to work that out.
I just want to take 1 or 2 more questions. There was a lady here who was grimacing when I missed her the last time. So
I just had a point actually following on from that. There is a campaign running at the moment on oh, sorry. Hi. There's a Is this one? Yeah. Okay. There's a campaign running at the moment on a site called winkball.com, which I've been following quite interestingly enough. And all the local MPs in London have taken advantage of this site, and they actually have their own campaigns and videos on site. But this platform has a facility that communities can then answer in return via video. So what you've got is this whole dialogue, and you've got these whole kind of trees of forward-backwards communication, thereby cutting, unfortunately, you guys out. And I was just interested in how you felt about that and how your role was, and would you be looking at those sites for information?
I don't know about that site. I'd love to find out more about it. I think if the media's view is, can it look at those sites as sources of information which it can then tech and spit out through whatever mechanism, that's not very interesting, actually. I think politicians should absolutely have mechanisms for direct communication with voters, and as much as politicians have got to work out what they're doing with this stuff, media organisations have too, so I'd love to find out.
There's no evidence yet that people want direct communication with voters to replace media analysis. You know, that they don't want to see David Cameron interviewed anymore because they can tweet him or watch him on web camera. Yeah. The two things go hand in hand.
I think that might be an appropriate moment to start, well, apart from the gentleman sitting in front of me looking quite scared.
I just wanted, after all this, wanted you to ask everyone who you think is going to win and by how much.
Go away, not a chance. Leave it up to Dan. Paul.
Well, I backed the Tories at 3-1 2 years ago, and I've got out of that. Now I'm backing a hung parliament, but I don't think it's going to be a hung parliament. I just think a lot of people are going to. I think it's going to be a hung parliament, and then I'll take my profit when that comes in. I think the Tories will win by more than people think because of the investment in the battleground seats where the elections decide.
Russell?
Milan 2-1.
Actually, if anyone knows the result, can you tell me now? Because I haven't been able to check on it all evening. Krishnan, I'm assuming you're...
Oh, it's a mug's game,
yeah, well done. Chris, I'm assuming you...
I urge the tweeters in the audience to tweet Chris Condron well hung. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming along here tonight. I wonder if you might join me in just thanking the panel for giving up the time this evening.